Hello, everybody! Welcome to the Machine Learning Grads collaboration with Keep Current Meetup. My name is Adrian Spataru, the organizer of the Machine Learning Meetup, and I am together with...
Hi, this is Liad. I'm from the Keep Current Meetup in Vienna. We are organizing meetups, workshops, seminars, and hackathon. Please feel free to find us. We are on Meetup, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. We have a website coming soon. If you wish to write a blog post in a high-level technical topic, please feel free to approach us. Also, if you wish to be a speaker in one of the upcoming meetups, please contact us directly.
Yeah, and today we have a unique collaboration where we're going to have two speakers, one from our side and one from their side, and we're going to have a very interesting talks today. And before we start, just so you know, we're going to use ahaslides.com/grats. That is ahaslides.com/grats, which you can use to put your questions for the talks. So in the end of every talk, we're going to have a 10-minute session of with your questions. I'm going to write now on the chat the link. There, you should have it now on the chat. And use that link to ask your questions to the speakers. So that said, I would like now to invite our first speaker. He's currently doing his PhD in computer science at Null Center, and his main focus is deep learning, but also graph neural networks. And today we're going to talk about something very relatable to, I think, everyone in the world currently, and that is COVID-19. And we as researchers and developers and technicians, and we can use the technology to improve our situation when it comes to COVID-19. And today we're gonna hear from Hussein all about this any moment. So Hussein, say hi to the people.
Hello everyone, hi. I'm Hussein here. Thank you, Arian.
Can you open your camera?
Liad for hosting this.
Can you open your camera to say hi to the people?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Hello. Hi.
So I have no words to say. Everybody is excited to hear about the art of doing graph theory applied in COVID-19. So please, the stage is yours.
Yeah. Okay, I will just share my screen. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm ready. Yes. Everyone is ready. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Adrian, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Hello to today's talk. I will be talking about stopping COVID-19 with graph methods. So basically, Adrian did the introduction. I don't need to introduce more about myself, but let's jump in the topic right away. So what I want to present today is an introduction to the graph representation learning, and I will show a case that is likely an application of graph representation learning that is drug repurposing for new diseases, and this actually includes COVID-19 as the disease we all know about and we face today. What I'm going to talk about today, or the order in this order, I will talk about the graphs. I will introduce you to what graphs are, and then I will talk about graph representation learning and why we need to do it. And then I will talk about drug repurposing problem. And here I need to say that that I'm not an expert in cheminformatics or bioinformatics. I just by learning from the literature about some assumptions that the how drug repurposing works, we could explain how graph representation learning could help us solving this problem. And finally, I will show couple of examples on what research on COVID-19 that is using graph representation learning has already done so far. So first, let's talk about graphs. So what is a graph? A graph is what you see here on the right. It's basically a set of nodes or a bunch of entities connected with a bunch of relationships or links. This is a mathematical model that represents what we call a complex network. And it's considered to be like a ubiquitous language to represent a lot of phenomena in the world, which involve relationships between entities. If I want to show a very prominent example that we want to deal with today, it will be this very specific example, and that is the protein-protein interaction network. What is a protein-protein interaction network? So basically, in the human body, we have in the human cells we have proteins, and pairs of these proteins interact with each other. Scientists have already identified pairs that actually interact with each other, and also pairs that do not. So basically, we have, again, if we talk about graphs, we have a bunch of entities with a bunch of relationships between them. So this could be represented as a graph. And this very specific figure that you see here, this is actually this is a subgraph or subnetwork of the of what we call the human interactome, or the protein-protein interaction inside the human body. And this subnetwork is actually the proteins that are targeted by the virus that causes COVID-19, and that virus is called SARS-CoV-2. So you can see that already it is like a sort of a connected component with small components around it. And we're going to go back to this and show how we can work on it. But now let's talk about graph representation learning and why we should do it. So basically, a graph is usually represented, if you do graph theory, you probably know, but if you don't, it's a graph, like a bunch of entities and links are represented in this way. Either an adjacency matrix, where we have a matrix, each cell in this matrix tells us whether there's an edge. If there's like 1 here, there's an edge. If there's 0, there's no edge. And it could be even extended with other than 0s and 1s. We can represent it as adjacency list, like just listing the neighborhood of each node, or we can represent it as an edge list. As the name suggests, it's just a list of edges, like 0, 2 here. This is 0, 2. This is 0, 4. So basically, this is the list here. But what is the problem with this representation? If we think about machine learning, what is the problem with this sort of representation? What we are used to deal with in machine learning in general, and our machine learning models are used to basically deal with tabular data, or data with a defined adjacency or defined spatial relationships between the entities. They have sometimes, like if you think about images or sequences, they have a regular grid structure, but the graph doesn't. And also this adjacency matrix doesn't solve the problem, because you can always relabel the graph, just rename the nodes, and you get an entirely different matrix that will confuse the machine learning model anyway. So what we would wish to do is to have another representation that we are used to deal with in machine learning in general, and that is a vector representation. What these typical ML models can deal with is what you can see here in the middle. So basically, if we look at the graph here, this is the representation. It could be represented in any way I've shown you here, but what we would wish to do is to represent it in such a way. So for each node, we have a vector of numbers that represents these nodes, and this is like basically a four-dimensional representation of these nodes. If we look at the visualization of a two-dimensional representation, you can see already that it kind of spots some properties in the graph and preserves them. Like if you look at the graph here, it's split into two communities, and these communities, you can already see them in this visualization, split here a community here and a community there. And yes, this is what basically a graph embedding approach would like to do. It would like to preserve some characteristic of the graph. And here I will then this would guide me to talking about what a graph node embedding is. Basically, it's basically about learning an encoder function that transforms each node in the graph to a vector representation, to a fixed length vector representation, so a d-dimensional vector representation. In this equation, we can see like this encoder function is the one we are trying to learn, and it encodes the node u to obtain a vector representation zu of a d-dimensional size. So basically, we would like to learn the parameters for this encoder function. And to learn these parameters, from a machine learning perspective, we need to optimize these parameters based on an objective function. And this objective function we can define based on our target problem. If we have link prediction or node classification, again, the technical term for link prediction is just to predict whether two nodes should have a link between each other, and node classification is to predict whether a node belongs to a certain class or satisfies a certain something, some sort of condition. And yeah, an example here would be just to say, yeah, well, try to keep if we have two nodes, try to keep them as close as possible. The distance between them, try to keep it as long as possible to their distance in the graph. And like, while this is like probably a very technical thing, we could go in, but not here. I would like to focus on this part here, which basically is the decoder function. This is basically how we get to know the relationships between these nodes in the vector space. That is the relationship. Probably, if I told you I have node u and v. What is the similarity between them? And you say, okay, I calculated with the dot product similarity. And what is this decoder function used for is to answer a query about our target problem. And in this case, probably if I want to say my problem is a link prediction problem, then this could be the probability or the likelihood that a link between u and v exists. We can get it from here. Again, forgive the word probability. This won't result in a probability distribution. This won't be between 0 and 1. But anyway, it will give us an intuition of how likely they are to link to each other. Yeah. So what is it like? If we think about link prediction here, like it would be something like is a link between 0 and 6? Does a link between 0 and 6, does it make sense that such a link exists or not? It's like when you're on Facebook and then you get a recommendation to befriend someone. So basically, it's exactly that. What's going behind in the background is actually link prediction. So basically, now we have the tools. We need a problem to solve with these tools. And now I want to talk about the drug repurposing itself. So what is drug repurposing? It's basically using the already existing drugs that are tested and well-known and in the market to treat new diseases. Yeah, one would ask, why would I care about drug repurposing itself? Why wouldn't we develop new drugs for the diseases? And the idea is that the practicality of this is low, because developing a new drug needs a lot of time and money. It would consume around 12 to 16 years, and would consume around $1 to $2 billion. Comparingly, the drug repurposing approaches take around 6 years and cost around $300 million to perform. And also, the safety aspect is preserved here because these drugs are well studied and the toxicity of them is well known. The side effects of them are well known, and also a lot of more information about them. But for us here, we like graphs today, so we are interested in the approaches that solve this problem and depend on graphs. There are a lot of other approaches that depend on different things, but we are interested in networks today. And I'm sorry, I'm using the terms graphs and networks interchangeably, and you can think of them as the same term today. So protein-protein interaction network is the basis for our talk today. And if I may talk about what it includes, it basically includes human proteins, drug proteins, and viral proteins. The human proteins are basically what we have in our cells. They are proteins that interact with each other, forming what I said before, the human interactome. We have viral proteins. These viral proteins target certain human cells, human proteins, to basically achieve what they want, the cloning and their mechanism of cloning, basically. And this basically the human proteins that are targeted are called viral targets. Sorry. Are called viral targets, and these form the disease module. And on the other side, it's also the same from a drug's perspective. It's that also drugs target certain human proteins, and these are called the drug targets. But they target these human proteins for a different purpose. Is that to perturb the behavior of the viral proteins and prevent them from doing what they want. Next is I want to show how this graph would look like. This is sort of an illustration. It's not like a real snapshot of the interactome. But here you can see that if we look here, these are like the human proteins. They interact with each other, as I've said. We have the viral proteins that target certain human proteins, forming the disease module, and also we have drug proteins targeting certain human proteins, also forming the drug module. But we also have links between viruses and drugs, basically encoding an indication that a certain drug treats a certain disease. And here I'm just simplifying it by linking the viral protein to the drug protein, but an indication is normally for the drug itself against this disease. But it's just for simplification that I'm using the links right away between those two types of nodes. So if we look back at the problem, it will be something like this. We have our knowledge of the current interactome, and what's new is that we get a new node, a new disease, and we learn that it targets those two proteins. Now our task is to predict which of these drugs can solve the problem, can cure or treat this disease. Basically our task is to predict these dashed black lines here, okay, which again reduces to a link prediction task, as I've shown before. I mean, you can think of it in very different ways, but one of the ways you could think of it is a link prediction task. You can also say it's a classification task, classification of whether a drug is beneficial or not, or which drug to use. To actually tackle this using embeddings, we need to know assumptions about drug repurposing. And basically, the two assumptions I'm going to talk about today is the proteins are not randomly distributed across the network, but they agglomerate in a certain network neighborhood. And the effective drugs normally target proteins closer to the disease module, close to it or within the disease module. So not that these drugs should definitely target the viral proteins themselves, but rather probably human proteins that interact with the viral proteins, or human proteins that interact with other human proteins that are targets of these viruses. And based on these assumptions, we can guide our embedding to, as I've shown before, like our loss function or our link prediction decoder, sorry, to predict or to learn the embedding of the nodes, so that we preserve this characteristic of the network. And in practice, this is like one of the examples of a research team that has worked on this. Basically, the idea is very simple. Obtain the embeddings of the nodes. So basically, I'm obtaining the embedding of a drug and the embedding of a disease. just as I've shown you with this equation. And also then, after you have the embeddings, you can predict with the decoder function whether what is the probability, the likelihood that a certain drug treats a certain disease. So this is to try to fill this question mark here. And you can follow different approaches. You can follow the unsupervised way that we talked about, how to preserve probably certain characteristics of the network, or probably think of it in a more of a supervised way. So probably pretend that you don't know that that a disease exists, and then try to apply the same idea on it. If it works on several diseases, if you pretend that they don't exist, then it probably could work on the COVID-19 virus, that is basically SARS-CoV-2. And this is now a claim that I cannot take reliably because we need support from the literature to verify this. But we can think of a lot of ways to have this sort of prediction be supervised. Finally, I would like to talk about the application on COVID-19 and how people actually applied it. So why does the COVID-19 case fit well in the model we described above? It's basically that it's a new disease with no indications. That's actually our problem. But what we need to do is to define the viral targets. As you remember, the problem statement was actually given the disease and its viral targets, and luckily someone actually did it. This research team basically they identified 29 viral proteins that are from SARS-CoV-2. As you can see here in the picture, these are the red diamonds, and then they identified 332 human proteins that are targeted by 26 out of these 29 viral proteins, and you can see them here. The the gray circles here. So basically we have our input for this. So another work that has been done based or built on that was, as you can see in the picture. So as I've told you before, embedding the drugs and the diseases, and then find the closest drug to COVID-19 in the embedding space. So basically here, if you look at this picture here, this is plotting basically the drugs and the diseases, the drugs in blue and the diseases in orange. And you can see that COVID-19 is around here, and then we could look at the closest drugs to it. And suggest a list of basically drug repurposing candidates to basically suggest for the clinical trials. And this is the comprehensive work done by Gissi and colleagues, which basically which has like a lot of other approaches than the AI-based approach or the embedding-based approach. But one interesting approach was the AI-based model, and spoiler alert, it was the best. Like they showed it to be the best in the paper. I mean, apart from when you mix all the approaches together. So what I want to say in the final notes is that the challenges for this and for this specific case that we talked about right now is how do you compare whether you're right or wrong? And I've already mentioned that you can depend on a supervised way of historic indications, like indications between drugs and diseases. But how can we guarantee that also this applies for COVID-19? Probably this is one of the characteristics of COVID-19 that makes it so special that we couldn't target it this way. And the other idea, and this very specific research has done it, is also to evaluate based on the clinical trials that are ongoing right now. But also there's a small paradox there that basically, if you are trying to guide the clinical trials, would you actually depend on what they do or not? And I want to leave you with this question in mind, because this is just thought, like a thought exercise. I also want to just list, if you would like to work with these, if you want to find these the data sets to work with on like on graphs that include protein interactions, you can look at this list. I've also included the references for the works I've mentioned, and with this, I would like to thank you all, and would hand the mic to you, Adrian or Liad. I'm not sure who of you would like to talk.
Hussein, I really thank you for this amazing talk. I'm gonna applause by myself in my room. Maybe I should know that.
Thank you.
So I think let's go to the questions. Let me put it on the screen. 1 second. So if you just joined and you have some questions, oh, sorry, train is passing. Okay. If you have any questions, put them on ahaslides.com/Graz. I just put it on the chat. So we've got already one question, and that's from Fernbedienung, and he asked, so you're using this approach to see which drug affect the same protein as COVID-19.
Sorry, the question was which drug affects?
You are using this approach to see which drug affect the same protein as COVID-19.
No, I understand. So it's not necessarily to see which drugs target the exact same proteins that the COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 targets, but it's about seeing which one is effective against the COVID-19 disease itself by looking at probably targeting what SARS-CoV targets in the human body, and also what is close to that. So basically, if I can also share my screen once again, just to show.
The person also had a follow-up question without any information how these drugs interact with the protein. Because how would you do that if you don't have information? That's what's the.
So basically, we have the information here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, people can see your screen.
So basically, we have the indication that certain drugs interact with these human proteins. So this is something that we already have, and we have this new disease that, let's say, this is SARS-CoV-2. Okay, this we know that it targets these. So what we want to do is find a drug here that targets either the same targets as SARS-CoV-2, that are those two, or probably something that is close to them. So if I would think of these two nodes, okay, something that is close to both of them would be this. So probably this drug would be a good candidate, okay? If I may simplify the problem this much. And also, if you look at, I think again, for this drug, for this protein here that is targeted by this new disease, we have this protein also interacting with it. And we could target this protein to also perturb the behavior of the disease itself. So the perturbation is not just about the drugs that are the proteins that are targeted by the disease itself, because this binding or this interaction between those proteins actually cascades. So basically, the effect between this protein here and this protein here could also have an impact on that protein right here, and vice versa. So I hope this would answer the question.
Okay, hopefully that answered your question, Fernbedienung. So we're gonna now go to the second question we have. Let me just put it on the screen. So Lumpel asked, how many dimensions do I need to put the graph in the vector space? So the bedding, I assume.
That's a good question. This is basically normally when we do this machine learning in practice, this is a question we ask ourselves and try to optimize the number of dimensions as a hyperparameter. So we try to look for a parameter that is suitable for this. And I can already tell you it's definitely not 2. So if you think like the plot was enough, normally it's not. But in general, what we need to do and what the embedding is all about, it's about representing these nodes in a size that is much smaller than the size of the graph itself. And in the protein-protein interaction network, it's the number of proteins is around 20,000. And for this, you would like to think of a constant to represent this d dimension, the number of dimensions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now.
Okay, so I think there's no more questions. Then I have one more question from my side, and what is the original? To follow up that question, what was the original dimension of that vector? So of that embedding. So are we talking about like several thousands, or are we talking about several millions here?
Sorry, the original
embedding space. So how big the vector was?
You mean in the original representation of the graph itself?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So in the graph itself, for each node, if we think about it in an adjacency matrix way, for each node we have exactly the number of nodes being the number of dimensions to represent it.
Yes, and
so we have an n times n. So we have an n times n matrix, and for our case, that is the protein-protein interaction case, it's 20,000. It's around 20,000. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess there's no more questions from the people. That's it. If you have a question, maybe for the next talk, don't forget the link. It's ahaslides.com/Graz. We will go for a very short break, 1 minute. So be right back. Go to to get a drink, and I'll see you back in 1 minute. And we are back. So we had a really nice talk about COVID-19 and how we can use neural networks and other methods to really create embeddings for those drugs and viruses. So now we're gonna give the podium for people from Keep Current. So Liad, who is next?
So our next speaker is Yoav Ramon. He is the organizer of the Israeli speech recognition community, and he also works in an Israeli startup named Hi Auto. He's going to talk about speaker diarization, which is the ability to separate between speakers.
Very relevant
Hi.
now.
Yes. Hi. Nice to meet everyone. So yeah, let me share my screen.
Just to mention one more thing, if you have any questions, don't forget to use ahaslides.com/grads to get your answered questions. So yes, please take the stage.
Okay. So hi, my name is Yoav Ramon, as Liad mentioned. First of all, I would like to thank Liad for inviting me to this meetup. It's really good opportunity, and also I hope that you will enjoy and like this talk. So we're gonna talk about something about some general challenge in speech, which is named Diarization. So first of all, we're gonna describe what Diarization is, and for that I will have like a simple demo of a part from a movie. You cannot hear the sound. You cannot hear it? Okay, so never mind. So, okay. So in general, what we see in this movie is a lot of people talking over the phone together, and this might be a problem. And what we want to do in practice is we want to take the audio recording of all the people speaking together, and we want to say, okay, in this part, this guy's the first guy talk, and in this part, in the red part, the second guy talk, and maybe sometimes they are talking over each other, and this is what diarization basically is: the ability to say who spoke when, and why it's important. First of all, if we want to say who is speaking in this audio recording, then we need to first identify who is speaking when. If we want to do speech recognition, which means if we want to take speech and translate it into text, then this is the easy way to do that. And also, if we want to do any real-world data analysis, it's a thing that I will speak about in the future. So just as general saying, diarization is the same. It's really related to segmentation in the visual domain, but it's only in the audio domain, which means the important question is who spoke when. There is another topic that's called speaker separation, and in that topic, what we want to do is we want to take the audio of each speaker and we want to isolate it. We want to have a clean audio only of that speaker. And this is not the same as diarization, and this is a much harder task. So as general note, what we do at Hi Auto is we do speaker separation, but we do it in an audiovisual way, which means we are not only using the audio, we are using also the video. And this way we can do a really good separation. But in most cases, you don't have video, and that's why you should probably use diarization, which is a much simpler solution and fits for most use cases. So what are the relevant use cases? So the basic one is, if any of you ever been in a Zoom meeting, then you see all the different people, and you can see a green rectangle on top of someone who's speaking. This is because Zoom knows to say who is speaking when. And this is a really simple use case. But it's also relevant in any other real-time use cases. For example, in many TV shows, you have real-time automatic transcriptions, and also in some cases when you have voice identification, for example, when you speak to your Siri or something like that, then some other people might speak as well, and Siri wants to identify only when you are saying it to wake up. So this is extremely relevant for real-time use cases, but this is also relevant for offline use cases. For example, if we have sales calls, when we have people from our organization calling to someone on another organization, and we want later to do some kind of BI, to understand if this man how much time he spoke, how much time the customer spoke, then it might be important. Also, any real-world speech recognition system. For example, if you want to do speech-to-text to any recording that was recorded in real world, you need to understand who spoke when, if there are multiple speakers. And also some BI that is related to meetings. Sometimes when you want to say after a meeting who spoke when, for example, if you had a meeting of 2 hours and you want to repeat only to the part when you know that someone specific talked, then you can do that with diarization. So again, this is extremely relevant, and it's being used in many use cases across the industry. So the first question that we mostly ask is, how good are we? So okay, you can't hear my recording. That's bad. But there is a basic data set that is related to speaker diarization. It's from 1997. It's pretty old. It's called Call Home Challenge, and it has 120 calls. When you had each channel of the audio file contains one speaker, and then what you try to do in the challenge is you try to mix both of those channels together to one audio stream, and then you try to say who spoke when. And you have the grand tours because you have also both of those channels are separated later. And this was the basic diarization challenge in the world until recently, and the community got really good at that. So the first article that got really good result was in 2015. It was diarization with iVectors, and by guys from Johns Hopkins University, and it had really pretty good results. I will speak about what without Oracle and with Oracle means later, but the metric is something called DER, or diarization error rate. And what that means, you can see it below. What that means, it means that we have some kind of reference to who spoke when, and we had our hypothesis about who spoke when, and then we see for each timestamp if we were correct, and then we take all the times when we were correct and we divide it by time. So it means that if we were correct on larger segments, then it's fine, and then we can score how good the diarization result we had is. So for reference, 10.3 is pretty good, and 8.6 is extremely good. And this is 2015. So later, neural networks came into place, and there is something called X vectors from 2019 by Snyder and et al., also from Johns Hopkins University, and they got, even without the Oracle, to 8.3 diarization error rate, which is really, really good. And for some time, the community was, okay, this is a case solved. We got as good as we can get in diarization. Maybe we can add like a bit more, but it's good enough. And then at an article from 2018 came another group, and they said something really, really important. They said that those state-of-the-art diarization systems, they perform well only on places that are extremely controlled. For example, on telephone, when you know the number of speakers, when there is not a lot of noise in the background, when the same speaker speaks a lot of time, this is where those places works good. But they say that they discovered in the workshop they did that this success does not transfer to more challenging corpora. So this means that in places where the situation is more challenging, this was harder. So and this is especially true to speech in the wild. What it means, speech in the wild? It means speech that we record on the real world. So as we said, diarization is used in real world places. So we need something that works in the real world. So when you read that, this is the polite way in the research industry to say this is bullshit. So we need to do it again, and we need to do it better. So what they came out in Interspeech 2018 is with a challenge called the Die Hard Challenge, and it was much harder task. So it was harder because you had only 19 hours of development test. So you don't have 60 hours of training, you have only 19 hours. It was across 9 domains. From real world, it was clinical interviews, YouTube videos, child language, and it was only in a single channel. And the samples were short, only 5 minutes per sample. And the evaluation test was also around 20 hours, but on different domains, which means you train on some domains and you test on another, because you want to see that this method works well in other domains too. And also 5 minutes per channel. And then after that, they took all the state-of-the-art results, and they showed that when you use those X vectors and those Y vectors, you don't get really good results. So the state-of-the-art before the publication of Die Hard on the same Die Hard was 26 diarization error rate. Remember that before that we had 8%, and even after taking the X vector and taking the Y vector together and fusing them, and even using some other method called the VB, then you get only to 18%, which is at least 200% of error relative to what we thought we are. So we thought this problem is solved, but right now we understand that this is far from being solved. So the question that comes now is, how do we do it? Because I want also to talk about not only about the problem itself, but also about the implementation of this problem. So in almost any voice problem, there are 2 words. The first word is how the entire world do it, and the other word is how Google does it. So Google likes to do things end-to-end, which means we have one big network that learns everything and knows to output the right answer. But those Google articles has some problems. First of all, you need a lot of data to train them, and for especially for universities, but even for a big organization, it might be hard to get that much of data. Also, you don't have the much computing power to do that. Some of those articles need a lot of computing data for a lot of hours, and also the robustness in cross-domain is unclear. For example, those articles weren't tested on the Die Hard challenge, so we don't know. So I personally don't know how good those things do in practice, and also there is no open source implementation available. So this is why we go to another approach. This approach says that we take multi-step approach. When we extract some data about our audio, we vectorize it, we normalize this data, and then we do clustering. And right now I'm going to go to each of those steps and tell you like what is being done on those steps. So the first part is what's called vectorization. In vectorization, you take the audio data and you input and you export. First of all, you export a spectrogram for each window, as you can see on the top left. Each of those windows, you run through something called STFT. This is some kind of Fourier transform, yeah, I'm missing an T in here, so it's STFT. So it's short time Fourier transform, and what that means is that
Okay, it seems like we lost. What happened? 1 second. Seems to be that we have a problem. Let's see if we can solve it quickly. Seems like the connection went down. Interesting. 1 second. Let's see if I can solve the issue. Yeah, as all online events, issues always happen. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
we
just
actually lost
realized.
connection. So
Yeah.
Yalv, I have some. We currently have the droppage. So could you go one slide back? We were off for the past 30 seconds or something like that. But yeah, you were talking about
A
vectorization,
little bit more.
about STFT, SFFTF, and that's it. So after that, the connection dropped. So yeah.
Actually, it's an error. It's STFT. So you hear me now?
Yeah. It's from my
Yes,
side.
we can.
The internet just crashed. It should be fine. Chat, can you confirm if everything is fine? If it's there, gonna check before we continue. You should get confirmation from chat. If we get so, we will then continue. Yeah, sorry for that, people. Yeah, as all online events, some errors may happen. So yes, okay, I think people are getting back online. Okay, everything should be fine now. Okay.
Okay, so I started to talk about vectorization, which means that for each audio window, we take an audio sample and then we run it through an STFT. This is an error. STFT is a short time for a transform, which means we are transform this one-dimensional audio into a two-dimensional system. When you have the frequency on one axis and the time on the other axis, and then you take for each relevant timestamps this STFT result. And then what you do is you run it through a network, and this network tries to classify different speakers. And this is the method of extracting those embeddings. And after that, you, as you often do with embeddings, you take the top layer off, and you're using only the top two layers as an embedding layers. So this is what you see on the right. This is what's called X vectors, which means we are training a neural network to get those speaker identification embeddings over some kind of speaker identification dataset. And then comes this part that is called the PLDAA normalization, which means we are taking those vectors. They are extremely long. They might be like a couple of hundreds of parameters. And we want to give more weight to the parts that are matter. So if parts are consistent between the same speaker and are different on the other speaker, then we call them the between speaker parts, which are good. We want to give a lot of weight to them. And there are some parts which are consistent inside the same speaker, but are the same between two speakers. So they are within speaker. So we want to give them some weight, but low weight. There are other parts when there is only noise. And this is irrelevant parts. We don't want to use them because they are not the same, even within the same speakers. And then we give some weights to each of those parts, and we train and we use this as our method. And this is extremely important, the PLDA normalization, because later we will come back to that. And the last part is what's called a agglomerative clustering, which means we are taking each of those vectors and we say, okay, let's decide how many speakers we are. So if you're looking only on the distances, then you can say, okay, each embedding is one speaker, or you can tell, okay, I'm taking only the closest one, or even less. And what's important in this part is to understand what an oracle is. And so oracle is when we know how many speakers are. So for example, if we know there are two speakers in a phone call, for example, then we know that we can then we know where we can cut the graph in our agglomerative clustering. But if we don't know how many people are in this call or in this record, then we have to have some kind of threshold. So what you mostly do is you find the threshold on your training set, training test, like which threshold works the best, and then you do the same on test set. But this is not so good. Part of the reason Die Hard challenge is so hard because you're doing another domain on test set, on the evaluation set. And this is because the threshold problem, this becomes really bad. So diarization works best if you know how many speakers are. If you don't know, then it might be harder. And so this is the solution in general. Let's come back to the beginning for a second. You do extraction of MFCC and then do the X vectors in vectorization. You do the PLDA normalization, and then you do the clustering. And after the clustering, you know to say on each window, on each time step, who spoke when. So that's it. So how you can do that in practice? So there is a speech recognition toolkit called Caldi. I use it a lot. I also wrote like some kind of introduction about how to use it. It's extremely popular. It has over 9K stars in GitHub. It updated almost daily. It's completely open source. It's widely getting used in the speech community, and it's ready for production. They even have like a server that you can put up and then do speech recognition. And the community in there is really good. And you can also do the diarization part in Caldi. There are even some pre-trained models that you can download, and you only need to adapt them to your domain, and you can use them. I have a link below about how to use that, speaker diarization with Caldi. Link. Or you can even search in Google speaker diarization, Caldi, and you will find this blog post. And I go in this blog post in depth about this solution and also about like how to use it. And so just as a last note, and there has been some advancements in this since 2019. There has been some advancement in the community, and many of them related to audiovisual speech diarization. So for example, in TV, it's extremely relevant. Then you can diarize well if you also look at the people and you understand how many people are. And this is also, you can see more usage of recurrent neural network and more modern neural networks than the fully convolutional one. So the challenges I'm repeating is it's hard to do that in real time. The vectorization is not always good enough. It's hard to get cross-domain robustness. It's hard to get one model that works in all domains. And estimating the number of speakers might be hard. And so if we don't know the number of speakers, we will have a really hard time. And also it's more of a theoretical problem that this dimensionality reduction to the vector space might create two sparse vectors. And then doing clustering might not work in all cases. The advantages is I gave last time, I gave this talk, I gave it to students. So I told them it's a really active part of research. So if you want to do something that is relevant and people will like to implement, then it's good. The building block architecture leave place to innovation. So when you innovate, you don't have to do the entire thing from scratch. You can only innovate in the normalization or only innovate in the vector extraction. So this is good for research. And also the value for ASR system is huge. Even if your diarization error rate is not so good, if you are doing speech recognition, speech to text, you will have much better results if you're doing diarization before. And also, one last part is the transfer learning is easy. When you do transfer learning in a diarization, you only need to change the PLDA normalization. You don't need to change the entire system. And I talk about that more in my blog post if anyone is interested, but this is the easy part. So yeah, I guess that's it. We'll go to the questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Yoav.
No problem.
Really, really good. Adrian, do we have any questions? I don't see any.
Yeah, currently there are no any questions. People are still, thinking about what you presented. So I guess until questions will pop up, I will start with my question. So
Okay.
you mentioned about end-to-end like modeling. Can we leverage end-to-end training with like a lot of unlabeled data and labeled data? Because like we can get a lot of unlabeled data of for speech, and then train it in the end-to-end manner, or maybe like a two-step algorithm where the first step you want maybe try to find the embedding automatically, and then the second step you would then classify.
Yeah. What is being done in the world is we are trying to. Some people are trying to do the vectorization process in the way that you spoke. They are trying to say, okay, in the vectorization part, we don't actually have to identify different speakers. We can, for example, generate an agnostic representation that works maybe well for a lot of kind of problems. The best work in that area was word to vec, not word to vec, wav to vec. It's a work by Facebook. I think it was published 1 year ago, and they are trying to do something really similar to what you do. But again, the problem with those approaches is that you need a lot of data. For example, for wav to vec, they used 10,000 hours of unlabeled data. So it might be hard to do that for most people.
So Leah, there's already a question. Maybe you want to pick that up?
We have a question in the middle. In the meantime, do people use guns?
This is not a generative task, so I guess I haven't seen anyone uses guns in that context. But I might be surprised.
Yeah, I guess the thinking here is maybe to generate new training data based, because if you said there's only 9 hours, so maybe it's a way to generate a bit more and then be able to train it.
Yeah, so maybe it's the way, but this is the diehard challenge. The problem is to learn how to use not a lot of data to work in different domains. So even if you exploit the data that you have and you create more data based on it, I don't see how it will help you to transfer to other domains better, but I might be surprised.
Yeah, understood.
Okay.
We have another question. Which other libraries are there?
So I mostly use Kaldi, and I really recommend using it. But there are also other implementations. I think the most popular one is in PyTorch. Also, if you search Diarization PyTorch, you will probably find it. But the neural network part is only part of the solution. So if you don't have a system that is doing the normalization and the clustering, as PyTorch is not doing, then you might have a hard time to do the entire stack only with PyTorch.
Okay, and I have actually a follow-up question. So you're using mostly Kaldi or maybe other frameworks as well. Is it language agnostic?
Yeah, so Diarization in its basics is language agnostic. So if you're training on data from multiple languages, then you can do it just fine. But if you train only on data from English, for example, you will get better results on English. So you can do a multi-language approach, but you can also do better results with only one language.
And what about different languages that are at the same time?
I personally haven't saw that anywhere, but I don't see any reason why it will work. I think it will work better than people saying languages on the same time. So the same language on the same time, but I haven't tried that. Okay. Mostly people are speaking together on the same language, in the wild at least. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for this great talk. It was a really nice introduction in this world, and it's quite interesting to see that there's little overlap with other domains. It's not all so different. Everything is connected in that sense when it comes to machine learning. So thank you again for taking your time today. So thank you for everybody to tuning today to our two talks. I hope this was informative for all of you and you managed to learn something. And yeah, I wish you all a great day and evening and see you then next time. Bye bye.